Hello everybody, welcome to NECAthon, a marathon that won't take 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years to actually finish.
ShinRobjira.
Today we're going to be talking about the Neca Godzilla 1954 Mark I and Mark II, and we'll also be discussing the Neca Godzilla King of the Monsters 1956 poster color version. With NECAthon, my goal is to kind of put the Neca Godzilla line to rest on my channel. These are going to be the definitive reviews for these figures. I'm never going to touch them again on the channel, and I really just wanted to have one final hurrah for this line, as the last time I talked about them, reviews were like 4 or 5 minutes and I really didn't care because I was going through burnout. So let's get started. First up, Mark I Gojira. Now I know getting an eye full of this guy might be not as appealing as you may think, but I will say this, and I probably will say it a little bit later on in this video. 1954 Godzilla was a huge palate cleanser because right before him we got 1994, Burning Godzilla, and 1984. 94 and 84 kind of being a bit mixed upon release. Myself, and I'm sure a bunch of others, were super excited just to have them in and not have to pay however much Bandai was charging for their super articulated versions. It's just you could tell you were getting the cheaper alternative. But when this guy came out, again, palate cleanser. Not perfect in any way, shape, or form, but the overall sculpt was fantastic, the paint was evenly distributed, and the figure overall just looked good right out of the box. I don't believe mine came with banged up toes, but he did come with some weird little paint defects on them. 90-degree angle face on toe. Same could be said for these Goji claws over here, so I'm not really going to blame NECA for that one. The eyes were a tad wonky upon release, but as I've learned in recent year, 54 Goji had some wonky eyes, so he looked like he was mad, or insane rather. So when I pitched a tent about that poster color version from Bandai having crooked eyes and being, you know, little pissy pants about it, that was actually entirely intentional, as it was present in the movie, which I never noticed because I'm a fake Godzilla fan. But anyway, I love this darker, almost bluish tone of gray that we got on Goji's skin over here. You know, instead of releasing a full flat gray figure, NECA kind of made it a little bit more stylized, and I dig that. I really do. The only area where I really don't dig it is going to be with the dorsal fins, as the dorsal fins kind of feel like frosted cookies. In some areas it's a bit worse than others, and for the most part they look fine, but some of them it's just like, oh, why? Why would you do it like that? Huh? What? And unfortunately, when it comes to this overall design, even with the godly blessing that is Mark II Goji, it's still present, yeah. But I cannot deny that the paint for the most part is rather even, the details are indeed fantastic, and save for the dorsal fins, I think the only areas that really suffered the most on these figures were the tails before they went with multi-segmented builds. As with the bendy wire, I mean, the figures don't look bad, it's just, they could have looked a lot better. I guess the only other complaint I really have is that over time, the teeth on this guy have yellowed and faded a little bit, but thankfully, that's something they fixed with Mark II and even the 56 repaint. But before we get to Ultraviolet Goji, I am going to award Mark I Goji a solid star in terms of detail and a half a star in terms of paint. Not the greatest, but definitely not X-worthy. Up next is the 56 poster color version Goji, which is the unfortunate middle child to the 1954 releases, as this guy came out either a year or two before all of the major reissuing happened, where the paint was improved and even some of the articulation. Not saying they added anything to all of them, but there are definitely some first run NECA figures that I have a harder time dealing with than their reissues. But anyway, paint. I love the crazy tones this guy was gifted. Light and dark greens on a black base with very bright and eyesore-ish looking reddish-pink dorsal fins. They do mostly suffer from what Mark I Goji dealt with, but here I kind of just like overlook it just a tad, as they're just so screamingly different that I can't help but enjoy it and have a goofy grin on my face as I look at this thing. The only major downside is NECA pulled a Bandai and the greens didn't reach to the tip of the tail. Whether it was intentional or not, it's just like, finish it! Don't be Bandai! But thankfully, these lovely tones of greens were able to reach the toes, the thighs, the shins, the side of the figure, into the arms, and even the claws. I just really dig this very haphazard application these things have. It gives him more of a Trendmasters-y hand-painted feel, which regardless, if we're talking about back when this was released, or even today, is super freaking welcoming for somebody like me, and I'm sure many others. The only thing this guy has working against him is just that not everybody might have found this appealing, but I certainly did. The eyes were applied a little bit more straightforward, and the teeth have this weird two-tone thing going on with them. The teeth on the top row kind of have like this two-tone thing going on, while the teeth on the bottom row are mostly gray until they're white. It's like that on both sides, and I kind of really dig it. And I also love how his tongue actually has detail on it. Was that present on Mark 1? Yes. Yes, it was. The only thing I'm not super crazy about with this mouth he's got is just the fact that he's got a bit of an underbite going on. In comparison, this is what Mark 1 looks like with a closed mouth versus this guy. And this is something that has plagued a lot of the earlier NECA releases. I guess it was just how it was applied to the figure or how it was made. Maybe it warped at some point. I don't know. I don't have all the answers here. But yeah, you can definitely see it's an issue with this guy, at least with my copy. Thankfully, the same thing didn't happen with Mark 2 Goji because, sits nice. Speaking of a magnificent mouth, this guy also came with a pretty cool looking breath effect piece, as you can see over here. And I just really dig the paint that they used, especially on the tip over here. The rest kind of just looks like frozen ginger ale. And I also really like that these things were pretty easy to apply, and you didn't need a stand to hold them up or anything. Unfortunately, they would warp over time if you left them in for too long, especially in hot conditions. But let me tell you here, friends and neighbors, this guy gets an extra little sub rating of a solid star because he's ultraviolet light reactant. Just look at that piece glow. I love that, and I love that the rest of the figure is going to have a little bit of that as well. It's that thick yellowish green that really shows up. I kind of wish they did more with the dorsal fins in terms of that paint, and thankfully it is going to be present on both sides of the figure, and he looks absolutely fantastic with it. And honestly, I would sooner take another paint job like this than I would something with glow-in-the-dark paint applied to it. Ultraviolet color Godzilla just looks a lot better than something glow-in-the-dark related. And honestly, that's mostly due to the fact that I prefer ultraviolet paint, whether it's under an ultraviolet light or not. It just looks a lot cooler. Glow-in-the-dark paint, I mean, yeah, it does look cool if it's painted at all, but sometimes the results aren't really all that great. Ultraviolet light is a little bit more situational than glow in the dark because you can leave the little guy on a shelf or something near the sun and he'll glow at night, but yeah, I definitely think we're sleeping on ultraviolet paint, or blacklight paint, whatever the heck you want to call it. So yeah, he might not be perfect in terms of paint, especially when it comes to these dorsal fins, but with just the sheer ridiculousness of his color palette, and just the fact that it reacts under ultraviolet light, I'll definitely give this guy a solid star in terms of paint, and of course, a solid star in terms of details. And now we can finally talk about Mark II Goji, which I can honestly and comfortably say within the walls of my opinion house, that this is one of NECA's better looking Godzilla figures that they ever released. For the most part, we're going to get the exact same thing that we got with the Mark I Goji, but it's a little bit more toned down. He's got a bit more of like a chalkboard looking aesthetic to him. You see what I'm saying here? The paint is a little bit more chalky instead of like globbed on. And I really, really dig that. It's almost like Goji's dusty, and yeah, he is a little bit dusty, but when it comes to the paint, it just feels like it fits so much better. And speaking of so much better, I very much prefer the paint job on these dorsal fins. Yeah, we still got some frosted cookie looking dorsal fins, but for the most part, the overall aesthetic of them and how they are presented here on Mark II Goji just vastly washes the floor with the original. Again, sugar cookie looking stuff is still present, but the overall paint job and displayability of this guy absolutely got the uptick. Granted, a lot of this you're really not going to see on a shelf, depending on how you actually pose these things out, but again, when it comes to the dorsal fins, Mark II Goji takes the cake. Not to mention the teeth are a bit on the glossier side, they look a lot sharper, and they haven't yellowed over time. Whatever NECA did, it absolutely worked, and I think it only strengthens the narrative present. Mark II NECA Godzilla over here is definitely the superior one. Plus, he too comes with a breath effect piece, as shown here, lovely detailed, simply painted, and of course, simply applied as well, no stand needed. So something I'd like to include with these triple reviews specifically is just which of the three figures present, be they repaints or reissues, is the better of the three. Granted, not every Godzilla figure got 3 variants made of him, but it's still a question I'd like to ask. A question I'd like to ask and of course answer, because honestly, from the bottom of my heart here, Mark II Goji is definitely the best. I love this guy in his wild paint. I love this guy because, goddamn, did we need a positive uptick with NECA stuff at that point in time. But this guy just does it the best. And once again, I can comfortably say this is one of the best looking NECA Godzilla figures of the lot. Now let's move on into articulation. You can open and close Godzilla's mouth, can look down that far and up that far. You will get a swivel up here as well. There is a ball joint down here, so looking farther down is entirely possible with the combination of these two ball joints. It's just more so looking up that's really not going to happen at all. Plus full rotation. The downward motion continues at the torso, where you will be able to get Godzilla to look pretty far down, and with the combination of these two ball joints, yeah, Godzilla can look down pretty dang far. But that's not all. Bring this guy up a little bit more, and you'll be able to rotate the torso all the way around like so. So regardless if you've got him looking down or up, he will be able to look at an angle as well. The arms will be able to rotate all the way around at the shoulder blade. It can also move up about that far and back down. You'll be able to swivel at the forearm over here, and you'll get a pretty decent bend in and a pretty decent bend out, like so. You will be able to swivel at the wrists as well. No hinge on this guy, but you will get a hinge at the palms over here. So you can move those fingers in and out like so. Up next will be the legs, which I don't think I'm going to be the only one to say this, but I've always had issue with NECA Godzilla legs, be it at the thighs, the knees, or even the ankles. Sometimes these things came to me so friggin' stiff, giggity, I had to soak them in a coffee mug, sometimes my own friggin' bathtub, just to get the water hot enough to loosen them up a bit. And they've never, ever stayed loose. Some of them have gotten better over time, but oh boy, not all of them. So you will be able to move the thighs out over here and back in, not by much, but you know, just enough. You will be able to do a full rotation all the way around like so. Jesus. You will also get a full rotation at the knee, as well as a bend at the knee. You'll get a swivel at the ankle over here with a very decent enough pivot at the ankle as well. The legs might have been the most problem child-esque things about these figures, but nothing really felt more mid than NECA's tails. Because up until a certain point in the tail, they are somewhat multi-segmented. You're not going to get much out of them, but there is segmentation here and there, and they are all on ball joints for the most part. It's just when you get to this here bendy wire, which is also on a ball joint, that's where it kind of just goes like a little downhill, as there were a few releases that came with broken bendy wires right out of the box, or sometimes the bendy wires just wouldn't move, or sometimes there wouldn't be any bendy wires in there at all. I'm still very much convinced at this point that my original first run NECA Shin Godzilla didn't have a wire in there at all. But I haven't touched that thing in quite a while, so I guess we'll find out when I get to that. All the NECA naysayers out there, I will give them this. The tail movement was definitely the weakest part of these figures. I'm not in any way knowing of NECA's financial situations when they first started with Godzilla, but I'm really not too sure why they didn't just do fully segmented tails from the get-go. But anyway, all three figures will be articulating the exact same way, differences being in breath effect pieces and paint jobs alone. So I'm going to give this lovely gentleman a solid star in terms of articulation, with a bit of a half a star as a sub rating for the tail. And this is something that's really going to remain until we get to 62, which is next. Moving on to size comparisons. Shodai Goji is probably one of the better earlier released Godzilla figures from NECA, and he definitely had a more flourishing afterlife after his first initial release. I mean, even though I gave the original a half a star in terms of paint, it's still a damn fine figure that's a great rep for the 54 suit. And the 56 poster color variant is honestly a really fun sidestep, and I remember thinking that these wild paint variants were really cool, and definitely showcased NECA's abilities to make something look wacky and just awesome. Plus, they didn't tack on an extra $30 just for some new paint, Bandai. But still, Mark II Shodai Goji definitely comes out on top as the better of the two for me personally, and I only wish other NECA released Godzilla figures got this kind of love and treatment with one of their many variants. But we'll get to that when we get to it. I miss NECA. I miss Bandai America. There's a lot of Godzilla stuff that is no longer present with us that I really do miss and wish were still coming out on a regular basis. But since we don't know what happened between Toho and NECA, I guess it's a safe assumption that it's probably never gonna happen again. And now that we have Haya somewhat filling the void of that of NECA, that's okay. I do so hope you enjoyed this first episode of NECAthon. If you didn't, we can fix that. Oh. Yeah. How do you like that? Purple LED light. When it comes to releasing these, if there's going to be more than one figure on screen, I think I'm just going to release that video in the middle of the week, whereas if I'm doing solo reviews in one singular video, I can probably drop 2 within a week. This is going to be the major theme following the channel for the next couple of months, except when new stuff comes out, to which I have to, kind of abandon everything and just talk about that instead. Movie Monster Series White Shin Godzilla's on his way. And that's all I have to say. I do so hope you enjoyed. Let me know your personal favorite of these 3 out of the 3 shown, and what do you think is the best NECA Godzilla figure of all time? Let me know in the comment section below. It's an engagement trap, please. And when next we meet, either it be later on this week because I get a second wind, or just next week with the next 2 episodes of NECAthon, I'll see you all then and there. Peace.